How are you doing, Antonia? It's brilliant to have you on.
Yeah, it's great to see you again, Jordan. I'm doing good. It's frosty where I am. Yeah, so it's feeling wintry. I was just saying that we're ramping up on our side work-wise because it's giving season and I'm in the charitable sector, which I know we'll go into. But yeah, so it's been busy. It's been busy, but life is good. And I'm happy to speak to you. I'm happy to see the Bitcoin Collective is doing this podcast. It's much needed. I think people always say there are too many, but there are enough that are really accessible. So
Hmm.
good on you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Because we were talking about this before, does it feel strange for you that everyone else is winding down for Christmas and you must be just, is it work as usual or winding up for Christmas?
Right. So I work at Save the Children, and so we're a global humanitarian organization. We're actually the biggest, well, independent children's organization. And I know you, Jordan, you're from the UK, as am I. So we're pretty familiar with Save the Children. But yeah, we're global. Working in over 110 countries. And so there isn't really a time when you can predict when things are going to be, less complex, less disasters or otherwise, because a lot of the crises that we work in are protracted, so they're over a long period of time. And I was just saying from the giving point of view on the fundraising side, yeah, Christmas is really key. Now in the US today, Thanksgiving. So this is the time where people feel more compelled to say, okay, what's gone on this year? What are the crises? Who's helping? And how can I make a little difference? So yeah, that's definitely a busy time of year.
Amazing. That segues us nicely. Can you Can you dive in a little bit deeper into like who, for people listening, they might not know who Save the Children are, they might have heard of them, but just not know exactly what it is that you do as an organization.
Yeah, so we're a global humanitarian organization. We work with children. So that's from even before children are born, so maternal health, all the way up to when a child is 18. And we also support their families. So what we look at is in crises, we're one of the first organizations to often respond, to deploy support. And that could be anything from a conflict to a climate related disaster. Recently in the US, the hurricanes. And we respond with deliveries of aid and support, and then we help build up communities. And then we're also in places where we work long term with families who need our help most. So that could be across key areas such as education, protection. So basically making sure that children have a safe place to be, as well as kind of access to food and, essentials. So education, protection, also healthcare. It's one of those organizations that's built, and I think this is actually an interesting part that not many people know. So we Save the Children are a British organization in our essence because we were founded by this kind of amazing pioneering woman called Eglantine Jebb in 1919. So that's over 100 years ago, just after the First World War. And basically a lot of Europe was under blockade then. And Eglantine, being who she was like, this is not right. There are, kids, German children, who are starving. So she went to Trafalgar Square and she protested and she said, this is not acceptable. End the blockade. Give children access to what they require, like security, safety, food. And she was actually arrested and she had to pay a penalty, I think, of £5. But then when it came to the case where the judge was actually looking at why she'd been given this penalty charge, the judge paid her penalty. Said, this is what you're doing is good. And that was kind of the origin story of Save the Children. So Eglantine Jebb, great name as well, isn't it? She's the pioneer really for children's rights. And she helped kind of write the draft that then got taken on as UN for the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. So a child has the right, no matter where they are, to security, food, access to health services, education, so that they can thrive. So see Save the Children as this organization that wherever they are, based on the needs of the children, we will provide all of those above things as best we can. So yeah, that's the Save the Children story. And I've been at the organization 7 years. I now work more for the Save the Children US side of the organization. So hence my reference to Thanksgiving.
And what's your role at
So
Save the
my
Children?
role is looking at specifically innovation technologies. What does that mean when it comes and relate to specifically Bitcoin, right? Is probably three parts. We break it down to fundraising. Our organization is based on requiring more funds to support the crises everywhere. So we accept cryptocurrency donations. We were the first global sort of international humanitarian organization to accept a Bitcoin donation in 2013. And that was in response to a hurricane that hit the Philippines and devastated much of the Philippines. And Jordan, that was an example where the donor kind of led the way and said, I want to donate Bitcoin to save the children. And we found a way, to accept it. So that was a key example of needing to kind of move with the times that you're in. So today we have, still accept Bitcoin, of course, and we accept anything that people want to donate to us because we turn that to impact for children. And we've raised over $9 million in cryptocurrencies, which for our organization is relatively small given our size, but it is, enough for people to take note for us to then investigate and invest more in how we reach people who own cryptocurrency. And actually, in the US, it is tax efficient for you to donate cryptocurrency because you can reduce your capital gains. So this is why, as well, like in the lead up to the end of the year, we want to make sure enough people know, probably also specifically in the US, that they can get these gains by donating. We see all these cryptocurrencies are up, especially this year, and people who have sold have had gains, and they can offset what they're paying to in tax by donating to an organization like Save the Children. And it's super easy. I mean, I'm doing a plug here, but it's super easy to donate
It is.
cryptocurrency. You've done it.
Yeah, I have indeed. It's, I think you have to make it really simple for people and just make it like a normal payment that people are used to. That's kind of how it feels like.
Yeah, and actually, I need to share the other areas that we work in. So one is the crypto philanthropy, which is what our kind of business as usual day to day is, making sure that we can reach people who want to donate to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that crypto fundraising campaign going on. And then there's the partnerships, which is where we look to partner with those in the space who are looking to support us, work with us, etc. And then there's the third aspect, which I think we'll talk about more on this call, which is the bit that really excites me, which is how we use the technologies, these disruptive technologies in the space, to include them in the work that we do in all areas of financial access, inclusion, savings and loans, community access to funds in the places where people need it most. So that's a big, big part of what Save the Children does. And it's kind of aligning the opportunity to test what these technologies bring and see how valuable they can be. And so that's the bit that is super exciting.
It's so exciting. I remember this from because you spoke at our conference 2 years ago now, over 2 years ago. And I still remember it was the end of your talk, and it was a quote when you were referencing the founder of
Yeah.
Save the Children. There was a really hard-hitting quote. I can't remember it word for word. It was something about being impossible and
Yeah. So
flipping that on its head. And I just remember being really hard-hitting, and it's really good to see organizations moving with the times and looking into new technologies, because in a lot of companies, you don't see this. You see a lot of sticking to the status quo and not innovating. But the long-winded bit to get to the question was, were you into Bitcoin before Save the Children? And how did you get into Bitcoin?
So the quote that you remember so well, Jordan, was from Eglantine, and she said, it's impossible if we make it so, it's impossible if we refuse to attempt it. So She was a true trailblazer. And you're right. I think, now Save the Children is a really 100 years on, a really large organization. And, you know, with many large organizations, especially, you're so entrenched in the systems and the way that you do things that even though they're not perfect, or they're far from perfect, in many ways they're broken, they're easier to continue to work with than to change completely. So I think what sets us apart, and I'm lucky that I'm in a team that invests in people being able to bring in innovations and that are ready to kind of make changes, is that we see ourselves as an organization as being able to implement and research what those disruptive ways that we could change are, even if they're uncomfortable. And yeah, so I think how I got into Bitcoin personally, and sort of to your point, it wasn't Save the Children that converted me, but it was certainly the experiences I had at Save the Children that converted me. Because for the first 5 years of my time with the organization, I deployed a lot. So I was sent a lot to crisis environments. So I got to see firsthand, the people that we support, and really people dealing with the worst kinds of crises, the complete lack of access to basics, often in the time where disasters had just struck. So seeing that injustice, seeing often for short periods of time, just kind of going in and then coming back again, seeing those extreme environments definitely sat very uncomfortably with me. And, being grateful to work for this organization, but at the same time, these crises seem to be getting worse. The impacts on the most vulnerable, innocent people seem to be getting worse. We don't need to look far. We look at the news, and we can see what's happening in places like Gaza today, Afghanistan, Sudan, the crisis. It's really overwhelming. And I think when the kind of penny dropped for me was, I'd heard about Bitcoin. I just thought it was another means to gamble and make some money quick, get rich quick. And that's not really my vibe. So, I just didn't have any faith in any of that. And so I heard about it. And of course, I didn't do the research to understand it at the time that I heard about it. And it probably took, it took the pandemic when things slowed down. I stopped traveling as much because I couldn't. So I was able to take a pause. I had a little bit more time on my hands, and I was lucky enough to be around people who were, showing me different things. And I read Jeff Boo's book, The Price of Tomorrow, started to understand that actually the economy and the way that things are don't necessarily need to be this way, and that the injustices that we see around us, even in our own countries, you don't need to go to Sudan or Gaza or Afghanistan. You don't need to go to Bangladesh and be in refugee camps to see the kinds of financial struggles that people are dealing with. And so it was that moment to be able to pause and to go down that proverbial rabbit hole where I started to have a bit more hope. I think you can say I took the black pill of the world and where it is, and that was very disturbing. And it remains disturbing. And then at the same time was able to take this orange pill, as they say, to start understanding that this isn't just about an asset that people are gambling and getting rich or not, or losing lots of money on. This is a technology. This is peer-to-peer transfer of value. And that is, when you get your head around it, that you don't need permission to transfer that value. You don't need a bank account. You start really entering the world of, wow, what could we do with this? What's already being done with this? And what if humanitarian organizations like Save the Children, with the track record we have, with the trust that we have, we are integrated in the communities that we work. It's not about me traveling somewhere. When I travel somewhere, I'm working with the local communities because they are our staff. They are Save the Children in Kenya, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Gaza. They are integrated in the communities. So yeah, it was a real kind of aha moment that gave me quite a bit of hope, and that still gives me a huge amount of hope. I don't think Bitcoin solves everything. I'm not, a utopian naive, But I think it's a great place to start. And I think I'm just really lucky that my organization allows me to go and do those investigations and work with people who are building on it at the second layer and the third layer, so that we can test it and be pioneers in the space. We accepted the first Bitcoin donation, and now we are pioneering the first Bitcoin cash assistance pilot. So it's still at exploration stage. But maybe I should stop there because I could really ramble into about this.
I'll dig into that in a bit, don't worry. But yeah, it's such a great angle that you've come in at or from, because a lot of people, I can only really speak for the UK, see it as an investment tool. Whereas you can really see it from a humanitarian tool, and how it helps people in other countries, not just the UK, which I think is a really important piece that's missed by a lot of people in the West anyway. How is Save the Children currently using Bitcoin as a humanitarian tool?
There's 2 points. There's the kind of the value bit of what Bitcoin brings outside of the UK, where we're relatively privileged with our access to financial services, right? So the World Bank says that 1.7 billion people are unbanked globally. That means no access to financial services. Then there's many more people who are underbanked, so they don't have the level of financial services that they should have access to, maybe loans and credit cards, etc. And then there are people, if you think about people who live under authoritarian regimes, right? So the Human Rights Foundation estimates that that's about 4.2 billion people. So there's a lot of billions that we're talking about here. So that's another 4.2 billion people live under authoritarian regimes who can decide whether or not somebody has access to their financial services. So that's where they might use coercion to stop them having access to finances. So however you look at it, you have a lot of people who are unbanked, debanked, underbanked. And if you say Bitcoin has no value, then you're saying that all of those means of accessing funds and storing value in a permissionless way, so without permissions, has no value. So I think that's the key there. And when we look at Save the Children, and what we're doing is we're looking at that kind of scope. We're looking at that huge gap between people who need access to financial services and the ability to save in maybe even a currency that isn't being hyperinflated. And we say, okay, let's test on a small scale Bitcoin as the technology. This isn't about trying to bring Bitcoin to people and educate people in Bitcoin. This is definitely not that. And I think that's the piece that's often missed. It's not about telling people if you hold on to Bitcoin, it will increase in value. And isn't it a great hedge on inflation? It is about using Bitcoin as a technology to provide a better medium of exchange, a better means to transfer funds to people versus trying to talk about savings. Most of the world that we work with and the people we work with, they don't have savings. They don't have that privilege to even think about savings. It's hand to mouth. So in that humanitarian context, Bitcoin is really about a medium of exchange. So how we can make sure they can receive funds from us. So I think a big part of the humanitarian piece as an organization, we do a lot of cash transfers. So put it simply, Jordan, gone are the days where you're helping a family that's fleeing Ukraine and you're just providing a blanket and then they're going to another charitable organization that's present at the center, and then they're giving them food, and then another organization gives them something else. It's that's just clunky, frankly, quite undignified, and doesn't provide them with what they specifically need, right? Maybe that family needs to pay for some medicines for their child. They don't want another blanket. So what we do is we provide cash assistance. And that's kind of where a lot of these humanitarian organizations are going increasingly is in cash assistance, which is essentially identifying a family in need and providing them with funds so that they can do what's best for them. And Save the Children does that in a way, relatively big way. In 2022, we did 165 million in global cash assistance. Currently in Gaza, we've distributed 8.6 million in cash assistance, not just to Gaza, but also through Lebanon for families who've been affected by the devastating consequences of what's happening there. So when we look at cash assistance, I think that is the area where we test Bitcoin, because we can reduce the fees of transferring value. We can reduce the limitations that we have working with third parties. So the cost for us as an organization to send funds is obviously something that we have to consider, and that can be reduced. And the other area is ultimately ensuring that we can set people up to receive funds without having to work with a bank account. They can have a mobile phone and a wallet on their phone, and they can instantly receive funds, which is quite groundbreaking.
It's quite incredible to think about, and also it must play into transparency as well, because if people donating always want to know where their money's going. So I suppose Bitcoin in the future will help with transparency in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. We'd be able to make an exception to hold Bitcoin for the duration of a pilot that we can go into in more detail. So basically, testing the Bitcoin use, the value in the humanitarian context with cash assistance. I think in the future, 100%, we will be looking at people being able to donate more directly to specific causes and be able to see where the flow of their funds are. And you can do that with Bitcoin, because I think people think that it's, that it's everything's behind you. You can't track cryptographic transfers. You can't track them, but you can trace them. And that's the beauty, is that you can have a level of visibility and transparency.
You mentioned, I think this is a good time to segue into your partnership with Fedi.
Yeah.
So I'm just reading this. It was the first global humanitarian Bitcoin partnership. Um, I pulled that from the press release.
Yes, we wanted to share that press release. But I mean, remember that I met Obi, the founder and CEO of Fedi, at the Bitcoin Collective. So huge kudos and thanks back to you, Jordan, for organizing what today is still probably my, is one of my absolute favorite Bitcoin conferences. And that was the start of some really great conversations that continue to this day in a really big way. So it's great.
That makes me very happy to see, because when you do a conference you don't always see the effects of it, and then when I met up with you in Madeira and I saw that this was happening, it made me very happy to see that, like, bringing people together and things actually moving forward, having discussions, and then partnerships. So yeah, very, very happy. How is that partnership going so far?
Yeah, so maybe before I get into Fedi, I can share something about a pilot that we did in the Philippines, which is partly why I also have done quite a bit of exploration of Fedi working in the Philippines. So last year we did our first Bitcoin exploration with Stackwork. So Stackwork is a mobile micro task, which is essentially, when you log onto things and you get like, identify the cats in this, or how many crossroads can you see? So that's kind of that information that's helping AI, right, do the work that it does, is required en masse by various organizations and entities. And what Stackwork does is it takes those tasks and it sends them, it uploads them onto its profile, and you can become a Stackwork worker wherever you are in the world. And once you've kind of been registered, you can do these mobile micro tasks from your pretty basic mobile phone, and you'll get paid for the time that you're doing that. And why is Bitcoin innovating that? Why not just send people Philippine pesos? Well, the reason you would do that is that if you're sending smaller amounts, and this is really key actually when it comes to cash assistance and transfer of funds, if you're sending small amounts, it doesn't really make sense to have a quite relatively high percentage of every transaction. If I'm sending you 30p or 30, cents or 50 cents, like it's not really worth the transaction. But when you use Bitcoin and Lightning on top of Bitcoin, obviously you can transfer value at a fraction of the cost. So it's more scalable. So we tested that, and we did that with a small group, kind of a youth group in Manila in the Philippines, and we got really great feedback. So as a result of that pilot and that Bitcoin pilot, we wanted to explore the Philippines. And as it turns out, we've got some great learnings, and we might just park some of the work that we're doing there. We're now looking at East and Southern Africa as maybe a more fertile ground for this initial pilot. And we've got various phases that we're rolling out. I can't share too much about what we're doing with Fedi because it is so current, and we really want to share, and I know the Fedi team does as well, what we're finding, but we want to make sure that we have a really clear proof of work lineup. And we don't just want to tell you we've done a pilot and move on. We really want to share what we've found, share the challenges, help other humanitarian organizations get involved, and ensure that we've got something that we can provide communities, but then we can walk away. Because we're not going to see we're not there to manage people's data or get more visibility. It's a very inspiring project. Maybe I should say what it is, because I feel like I've talked about where, but I haven't said what it is.
If you can.
Yes. Very. So Fedi essentially harnesses the power of Bitcoin. Yeah. So peer-to-peer transfers that is permissionless. And also eCash. eCash on Bitcoin equals more security, more privacy, and more scalability. What that means, in essence, is you've got many communities around the world who are ready because they're underbanked or don't have a bank account at all, that they use community cash. They use like community banking. And there are various words that people use depending on which country you're in for this. But think of community banking, not perfect, but better than nothing. Why is it not perfect? It's not private. Jordan and I are in the community, and I can see, I know how much you've got. I might go and say, Jordan, I need a bit more because of this and that. So you don't really have your privacy. It's certainly not secure because often you're literally using a tin box somewhere and putting cash in. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily easily travel when you're then displaced by all the things that we've talked about, conflict, a climate-related disaster. So really, we are at the stage where we want to digitize, if the people want to do this with us, these community banking systems. And one thing that Fedi does is it recognizes this. It recognizes that the way you or I or others in the West use this technology called Bitcoin is going to be different to how people use it in other places. We talked about, a medium of exchange, forget savings, just give me funds that I can use today for my family. And so one of the things that Fedi has been able to crack as a problem, if you like, is custody. So who holds the value? Who is securing it? If it's not a bank account, if it's not a bank or a third party that's taking a nice chunk of a nice bit of commission, then who is going to be securing it? So it basically harnesses the power of the trust within a community so that you can secure your funds. And it's based on Bitcoin, but we're not talking about just Bitcoin. You'd be able to send funds using the Bitcoin network that could be instantly changed into Philippine pesos or Naira or Kenyan shilling. And you would have off ramps, basically the ability to convert your digital money into fiat, tangible money today through either kiosks or basically a free market that would evolve around that. So Fedi is community cash support, or in our minds, because as a humanitarian organization, we think there's great value in being able to say, I no longer have to identify each individual and support them with cash assistance. I can now harness the power of that community and the trust that's lived for generations in that community empower them to have, in the most cases, 4 people who are holding the value of the funds of that community, but they can't see what each member has, and that's the privacy aspect. And it can move with them if they get displaced, and they can then operate with other federations. So it's great because in the long run, you might be able to have and see a circular economy where no fees are being taken. When you transfer within a federation, you're doing that at no cost. And the other thing that they do that's really great, and I said I wouldn't get too technical, but Peter could say, well, if you're using Bitcoin price to Naira or to US dollar is constantly fluctuating. How does that even work, like on scale? Well, Fedi does this thing that we are exploring where they can essentially stabilize the conversion for a period of time. And that is really key, because when we're sending $5 to somebody, we can't afford that to turn to $2 over the space of a couple of hours. We need to be able to know that we can transfer and that the value will stay fixed.
And I love this side of, like, I was just sucked in to what you were just, that whole 10 minutes of, like, this is the side of Bitcoin that people need to understand. Not the investment side. Like, this is the really important side, like changing lives. Whereas the investment side, it is, but it's not the important side of it. And it's the reason Bitcoin was made is, as you said, electronic peer-to-peer cash system. And that's what you're building, or what you're testing at Save the Children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the beauty is that you have got the investment side and the price side. And the beauty is that both, like, if more people use it to be able to become more financially independent and to become more empowered, then the price will also go up, and that will help people who've invested and entities who've invested. So you suddenly have a level playing field. You're not going to have level outcomes in terms of value, but everybody benefits. And that's the magic that I think you don't see anywhere else. And so, yeah, it doesn't cease to kind of inspire.
One of my next questions is, if you're looking into Bitcoin as an emerging technology, what has there been any challenges along the way of, with such a big organization, Save the Children, trying to have projects like this?
Yeah.
Have you noticed any challenges along
Well,
the way?
that was actually the thought that was just kind of escaped me was, it's not Save the Children that will decide that this is valuable and bring it to people. Let's be really, really clear on that. This is going to be used by people because it provides them with a solution. Save the Children just potentially has a role in bringing it to some of the most vulnerable people who maybe don't have access, who maybe aren't in capital cities. But make no mistake, it is not dependent on Save the Children. So I think it's just whether or not I think our role is more on the providing, a level of understanding and education. There is a lot of things out there that are damaging to people that sound like Bitcoin. So we need to, I believe, or we have a responsibility when we do these kinds of pilots, that we integrate a level of financial digital asset understanding, because a lot of entities are taking advantage of that vulnerability. So I think there's a big education opportunity for organization, and there are lots of people, well, there's some people doing really great things in that space. But the challenges remain enormous. I just think if you think of it as a steamship versus a jet ski, if you can turn a steamship into just a little bit of an angle, then its whole trajectory changes and there's a huge wake. So we are a steamship in terms of like our size and our, and how we work. But I think this is why I am working and remain in this incredible organization that I know does all these good things, because I think this is just another pillar that we can add in our financial inclusion work. And it just so happens that in doing that and saying that that's what we're going to do, we've been able to partner with, I think, the best in the space. So people who are really like-minded and who have worked with the kinds of, communities that we work with. But the challenges are definitely there, and that is part of the process. We're still very early. We're very early. It feels like we're too late with everything that's going on, but we are very early, and we want to work. We're not trying to do something, we want to work fully above board, and we have to do quite a few checks and balances in everything that we do that maybe individuals and other entities don't need to do. But when we make waves, we really have impact.
So important. Just innovating in such a big, I love that, the steamship, trying to maneuver that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the show notes below to your page for donating. Because I think it's really important for people to hear the side of Bitcoin, but then also contribute as well if you can. And so I want to say thank you very much for coming on. And if anyone wants to get in contact with you, where should they be looking?
Yeah, so you can actually email bitcoin@savechildren.org.
Aha.
So if you put that in the show notes as well, then you can get in touch. And I'm doing quite a lot at the moment that I think the exciting thing is watch the space. That's what I would say. Know that we're working in the ways that we are. Know that we'll be sharing more about the ways that we're working with Bitcoin. And I'll be at MENA Bitcoin, the conference coming up in Abu Dhabi. So if anyone's listening and you'll be there, I'm also on Twitter. So if you share my Twitter handle, Jordan, then you can obviously DM me there too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, it's always great talking to you.
Yeah. See you soon.